So, a pleasant day, everyone. So, for today, we are going to talk about reading and writing skills. So, this will be for the first module. So, our title or our topic for today is compare and contrast patterns of written texts across disciplines. So, the keywords that we have here would be compare, contrast, patterns of written texts, patterns across disciplines. So that means we are going to draw the similarities and differences in terms of patterns or structure or forms of various text types in different disciplines. Okay. So credits to the development team of the module. So let's proceed. The objectives that we have for this lesson is to determine the purpose and structure of comparison and contrast in writing. Okay. You have to identify what's the aim of the writing, okay, or the comparison and contrast process in that particular written material. And you would also have to explain the organizational methods. What are the ways, okay, that were used in comparing and contrasting, okay? Aside from this, you would also have to understand how to write a compare and contrast text, okay? For sure, you have been doing this before already. So let's just have a rundown of what this is all about, okay? So fill in the boxes, look around you and pick two things. So siguro this could serve as our example on how we compare and contrast, okay? But let's go back to the keywords first. Compare and contrast. Usually, in the Philippine setting, we usually use compare to set the differences, which is a misconception because when you compare, you draw the similarities, okay? Similarities. But for contrast, we talk about differences. So here is an example from the module. So we have a whale and a fish. Okay, this fish could be probably bangus if you want, bangus, or like sardines if you wish, whatever, or salmon if you want. So then we have the whale. So the similarities that they have is that they live in water, they have fins, they can swim, okay? But they have numerous differences. It's like what? Based on this module, whale have hair, they are given birth alive, and they breathe air because they have that hole, diba? That when they need air, they actually go above, they approach the surface of the water to get air. And then for fish, they lay eggs, they have scales, they breathe through their gills. Through they actually survive in water that they do not need air. Okay, that if you're gonna expose them to air for a very long time, they will die. Okay, so I hope we're clear with about that. So for you to practice, you could use this example, this graphic organizer, or a Venn diagram when you finally got a hold of two things that you want to compare and to contrast. Okay. Now let's get to the discussion proper. Okay. So when we say compare, we refer to the method of distinguishing the likenesses. Like what I've mentioned, the similarities. Okay. How are they alike? And then when we talk about contrasts, we talk about the similarity, the differences, I mean. So furthermore, contrasts, Allow me to erase that. Contrast alludes to identifying, as it were, the contrasts between the two things. So again, compare, you distinguish the likeness and contrasts between two things, but the contrast again, you highlight what's different. Okay, so to make it easier, compare is the similarities again, and contrast is the differences. Okay, so it is stated here that the ability to compare and differentiate is one of the primary higher order abilities students are introduced to. So once you're capable of identifying the classifications, comparing the terms, the ideas, the likeness and differences, that means you understand. There's learning, okay? That's transpiring. So a key to a good text for comparison and contrast is for you to choose two or more subjects, which interact in a meaningful manner. So the very aim of having these activity is for the idea that the subtle differences or even the surprising similarities of the text to be highlighted and not just stating what's obvious, okay? So, for example, if you choose to concentrate on two opposing topics, you wouldn't choose apples and oranges, but you would rather have to compare and contrast two types of oranges or two types of apples. Like, for example, if you want to study about apples, you could have Fuji and what's the other type? The Washington, is that what you call it? So the Washington type. Okay? So you could like try to make the difference, or Fuji apples with green apples, or by just having red apples or green apples. Okay? So we're trying to look into the subtleties, okay? Yung mga hindi halata, okay? It's also an evaluative tool, okay? Since to make accurate assessments, it already shows that you could actually look into the critical points of the material as you point out their similarities and differences. So comparing and contrasting is a key method for many comparisons of workplaces. And it happens in day-to-day living. Like before you purchase a phone, you actually compare it to your previous phone, or you look at reviews which actually compare and contrast different gadgets. So comparison and contrast are used to assess individuals, departments, and companies. Pero syempre, allow me to remind you that in terms of individuality or personhood, comparing oneself to others would be very difficult. So, you would always have to compare yourself sa sarili mo. Okay? Okay, ayan. So, let's read each sentence. Then, if the sentence is comparing, right, compare, contrast. If not, okay? Let's try. That story resembles one I read a year ago. The word is resemble. So, it's, yes, compare. I eat meat, whereas my parents are vegetarians. So there's the difference. It's contrast. I ordered steak. However, I was served with chicken. That's a contrast. Leia had her hair done in style similar to mine. Compare. So let's look at the keywords after this. I got A in English and I'm doing well in other classes too. Compare. Okay, perfect. So allow me to highlight resembles, whereas is contrast, however is a contrast, but once you see similar and to, okay, those are comparison. I hope we're clear with that. Okay? Now let's proceed to the discussion of the activity one. So actually this is the discussion or lecture proper that we have for today's session. So development patterns help us sort out paragraphs, or essays and shape the information. So how they get developed, their structure, okay? They can help organize a sketch, or they can determine the form of a paper. Like what I've mentioned, structure, pattern, form are interrelated but not necessarily interchangeable in some sentences. Okay? Note that most paper would use a variety of approaches working together according to each other's functions. So these are examples of how methods can can help in limiting the topic, developing a statement, thesis statement, and writing an outline. So here are the types, okay? So we have narration. So when we say narration, you practically tell a story. You're trying to tell something that happened, okay? Example, the history of the Love Canal. A narration deals with people, places, events, dates, etc. So there are various texts that show narration. This could be autobiographies. Actually, other types or methods overlap with each other. But if you're practically writing let's say a travelogue, focusing on what story happened, you're making narration, okay? If it focus on how the story unfolds, but not really on the description of the things that transpired, it's more on the narration. If you're talking about history, how Rizal lived, um, how the Philippines was said to be rediscovered by the Spaniards, or how the Philippines was found by the Spaniards, that's history, you're narrating, okay? But if you're talking about description, you're telling what something is like, okay? You're describing, you're showing the details, okay? Describe the damage done by the pollution to a river, lake, forest, etc. A good description will revolve around a dominant impression. So if you're talking about the pollution done by a river, you could actually use imagery or words that appeal to the senses. Just like what? Uh, there's a stench uh, that you could smell when you pass by the river. There are tons of trash floating. Okay. Um, the color of the water is mud like, okay, or dark colored. And then you cannot actually drink the water from the polluted river because that will be very risky for your health. So I was describing, but I was not necessarily telling a story. So can I describe while telling a story? Yes, you can. But uh, you can tell a story, right, through description, but it doesn't go the other way around, that you can tell the story to describe, not necessarily, okay? Description is a very good element in a narrative or in telling a story. But for description, it could be a simple description without necessarily telling a story. Okay, I hope I didn't confuse you with that. So example, if you want to tell your mother why you got a low score by telling her what happened since the night you were reviewing down to the moment you submitted your paper, that's narration. But you could describe that night. How did you feel? Uh, what was on your mind? What was the atmosphere? What was the paper like? You could include the descriptions. But description can stand without narration. Like you want to describe the test. It was terrible. It was very difficult. The items that were included were not part of the discussion, something like that. So you were describing but not necessarily narrating. Okay? Then let's have illustration. With examples means that a generalization is supported by specific instances. Example, food industries do not encourage consumers to produce less litter. Okay, so you have a generalizations backed up with specific contexts or specific statements. Okay, so next, when you illustrate, you have this idea and then you give specific examples. Okay, definition on the other hand, you give the meaning. Okay, explain what something is. What is ozone layer? What's love? Okay, hindi mo sabihin love is you. Okay, but you have to define what love. It is a feeling or something something. You explain what that actually is. Then classification on the other hand means to sort items in order to group together those with similar characteristics and to distinguish them from those with different characteristics. You actually classify. Ale, classify. Why is my handwriting like this lately? Classify. So you classify meaning you sort items in order to group together those with similar characteristics and distinguish them from those with different characteristics. So, for example, provide examples of how we can reduce, reuse, and recycle. Okay? Then we reduce, uh, let's say when we go to the groceries, we try to buy, okay? We try to buy only as much as we need, okay? And then when we reuse the bottles that we used, okay, that we have already used, we reuse them, and then etc. So for example, you want to categorize things, look for their similarities, and then divide them. You classify, you categorize them. And then we have causal analysis. You find the reasons why something happened, okay? So why did they get unemployed? You look for the reason, okay? So why did they get sick? You look for the reason. Then argumentation, okay, you try to provide enough reasons and proof for you to convince the reader. So there's a certain opinion or argument that you would like to put forward to your readers. Okay? Example, industries do not receive enough incentives to reduce waste. Okay? So another method is to compare and contrast pattern. Okay? This is what we're talking about. This arranges knowledge according to whether two or more items are identical or distinct from each other. So this is an effective pattern because when one subject is described in relation to other, you understand it better. Because when you know how to describe it, to compare and contrast it, that means you have already understood, okay, the characteristics of those two. For example, if you're going to compare a desktop with a laptop, you already know the fundamental differences and similarities. You're not just you do not just know them on a surface level. That means there's already the understanding. Okay? If you're trying to compare an Apple or an iPhone with an Android phone, that means you already have used both and you understand how these function. Okay? So this pattern organizes knowledge about topic by separating its good and bad sections or the pros and the cons. Okay? So it's effective to use when you as a writer wishes to discuss both sides of a problem. And usually that's better because you will present both sides. But again, you have to consider what kind of written material you're trying to have, because you cannot, there are instances when presenting both sides won't be beneficial for you. As with the pattern of comparison and contrast, there are several variations to a pattern of advantages or disadvantages. So here are the signal words, just like what we did a while back, okay? When we say comparison, there's the similar, both, also, to as well. In contrast, on the other hand, however, but in contrast, it differs from well, unlike. Okay? Are we clear with this? Okay. So these are the methods on how we can limit the topic, how we can write a text or at least develop a thesis statement and write an outline. We could narrate, we could describe, we could illustrate, we can define, classify, make a causal analysis, or make an argumentation. But of course, we can also use the comparison and contrast. And by doing this, we can consider the following signal words, okay? So comparison, you look into the likeness, similarities, contrast, is differences, okay? So this is the source, okay, of the module. So let's look into this. Choose one of the categories, pick two examples from each. Then come up with one similarity, one differences between the examples. So let's use what I told you a while back. Let's use a Venn diagram. Let's talk about iPhones and smartphones. Or Android, I mean, Android phones. Android phones. So first, these are smartphones. These could have applications. This can be used for calling or texting. This can be used for taking photos and videos. That's practically their purpose. They can also work as organizers. iPhones, on the other hand, have different ports and charging or charger as well. Okay? The Android phones technically use Lightning or the latest one. I don't know the type. I don't know what you call the other type. And the Android phones also have the type C or the traditional flat one, whatever you call it. And then you also have difference with the interface, the OS, okay? iPhone OS, Apple OS. This one, you use Android. You usually find App Store for installing. For this one, you use Play Store or whatever Market Store, whatever is available. Okay? So they have different interfaces, they have different formats. Okay? This is from Apple. This is from various companies like Samsung, Huawei, etc. So that's an example of how I could actually come up with similarities and differences. Okay? So we can also use this one, this graphic organizer, like traditional class versus online class. In a traditional class, you have classroom presence. Well, on an online class, you have asynchronous. This one is for the differences or the contrast. But for the similarity, you have collaborative learning is possible in both modalities. The technological tools are used for both. Okay. So on your own, you choose one of the topics, then you try to practice 2 to 3 paragraphs of text using compare and contrast patterns. So allow me to help you in an overview, okay? So you have this organizers, right? You can use this, or the Venn diagram. So the best thing that you could do for you to be able to write a comparison and contrast essay is pick a topic first. Topic, okay? So let's say you want to have love and friendship, okay? Love and friendship. This is my technique. It may vary with what you prefer, but this is how I usually do it, okay? Before I come up with my essay. I'll use a diagram. I could use this, this, and this. So once I fully understood the similarities and differences, I'll come up with my thesis statement, okay? Then afterwards, after coming up with thesis statement, that the thesis statement is what I want to write in the paper, that let's say these two are highly different, or friendship is better than this, or love is better than this. Then I would have to outline, okay, the intro. Body would include the similarities, and differences. And then the conclusion, which one is better? Okay? So in that sense, you get to understand, you get to write easily because it's very difficult to start from scratch, as in without any guide or without using any of this. Then you want to write instantly on a sheet of paper. Unless you're a pro or you're an expert writer. So with that, okay, I hope you've learned something for today. So let's look at our objectives. Did we determine the purpose and structure of comparing and contrasting? Yes, we did. Were the organizational methods used when comparing and contrasting used? Yes. Yes, I mean, did we understand how to write compare and contrast text? Yes, we did. So with that, I hope you understand it. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye.